Okay,
Okay.
well, hello and welcome everybody. Again, my name is Evan Bennett and I'm the Financial Services Program Manager here. And today we are talking about virtual bookkeeping solutions for nonprofits. And I have with me two wonderful people and who I will introduce in the course of our presentation this morning. The first one I want to let you know, her name is Jenny Lundqvist, and she is both Swedish and our client engagement specialist. So she will be fielding questions. Jenny, go ahead and say hi to the lovely people out there in virtual bookkeeping land.
Hi, welcome everyone. I hope you will enjoy the webinar.
Again, for those of you who are just coming in, use the Q&A feature and Jenny will help collect those thoughts and information as we go along. We have a couple predetermined places that we're going to ask questions, but if something is really important or seems particularly on topic, I am sure that Jenny will stop me mid-flow so that we can answer questions. And then again, just to give you kind of an idea, today is a high-level overview of a couple different options and solutions. We will discuss here and there maybe more in-depth questions you may have, but really organizational specific questions are things that we would recommend that you talk to us directly, and we have an option for that we'll discuss at the very end of the presentation. Again, today's presentation should be about an hour with some stops for Q&As, and we'll go from there. Okay. Okay, so as I said, my name is Evan Bennett. I lead our bookkeeping and accounting services here at 501 Commons. My background is actually in the arts. I've been an executive director 2 different times, and so a lot of my bookkeeping experience really comes from being on the ground, having to use QuickBooks and the figure it out mentality. So luckily to that, I've added an incredible team, an MBA and accounting certificate, and we have some really wonderful people that I get to work with who fill out that expertise. One of them is the wonderful Eileen Moran. So I'll let you read her bio, but Eileen is one of our senior financial associates here at 501 Commons. She has a long list of accomplishments working as a controller and in nonprofit and for-profit, and she's an enrolled agent with the IRS, so she does a large amount of our 990 work. So Eileen, do you want to say anything to the lovely people out there?
Hi.
Eileen will be assisting me in the presentation. Welcome. Eileen will be assisting me in the presentation today, especially since she has a lot of on-the-ground and high-level knowledge of accounting. So when we get into questions you may have that relate specifically to intricate accounting knowledge, Eileen will also be able to answer questions as needed. And just a little overview of 501 Commons in case you are new to us. We have a number of different service lines, of course, financial services being one, but we also have full service management consulting, technology, including IT planning, infrastructure, database development, accounting like us, HR, professional development, and board development. So we can help you in a number of different ways. And our focus is really strengthening nonprofits, and which we believe lifts all of us up. So we are glad you're here today, and we look forward to presenting this for you. Okay, so in today's discussion, we are going to start with talking about QuickBooks Online, which I know many of you came here specifically for, so we are glad to be able to present that to you. So we'll talk about what to consider when moving to QuickBooks Online, and a lot of this is from our own lived experience. We have moved a number of clients from desktop to online. We've started on online, we've started on desktop, and we've learned a little bit along the way. We will also be talking about accounts payable and making that virtual. So one thing that we've discovered in our work in financial services is that most of the time people have an easier time with accounts receivable, getting payments in virtually, whether it's through web processors like Stripe or credit cards, et cetera. What we found through our journey, and that's why we're presenting it today, is that accounts payable tends to be the hardest thing to let go of, those paper checks, that paper process. So we'll talk about a couple of different options and then some considerations with those options that we have put together for you. Okay, so let's talk about why transition to QuickBooks Online. So again, today's discussion, we are assuming that you're interested in dipping in the pool of QuickBooks Online. So we won't talk as much about desktop versus online, unless it's in the sense to highlight the differences or the things that you need to know in terms of pluses and minuses in moving to the new platform. Okay, so QuickBooks Online. The benefits of moving online can include eliminating your organization's need for an on-site server, increasing access to accounting records, taking the pressure off in-house or contracted IT managers and services, improving sync abilities with third-party payroll providers, and improving access for your contracted accounting services like 501 Commons. Okay, so let's talk about this first. I'd be interested to know how many of you out there have an on-site server or are using a singular desktop to act as the server for your QuickBooks. So QuickBooks Online. So as you probably know, it's a cloud-based platform. It takes the pressure off of you to host a server and keep that up, as well as that particular level of security. And it increases the ability for you to work remotely. Additionally, what I like about QuickBooks Online is it allows you to extend invites. So if you have a treasurer, for instance, who is somewhat financially knowledgeable or extremely financially knowledgeable, you can invite them, limit their access to things like just reporting or whatever level of access you want to give them, but they can work from anywhere, pull those reports themselves, and it can eliminate at least a certain amount of back and forth for you. So let's talk about desktop. So here's the deal. Desktop needs a host computer or server. So you are going to have it remotely or located somewhere in your office or at someone's place of business. So you can have some kind of remote access like we do at 501 Commons. We can use a desktop file with remote access. But even in our lived experience, it's not as clean in terms of access because things like internet connection, server availability can affect that. So it can mean that you don't have access and it can be a complicated setup. You definitely need professionals to help you. Okay, so let's talk about increasing your access to accounting records. So with QuickBooks Online, again, like we said, you have the QuickBooks Online Plus comes with up to 5 users. So that can be your staff, it can be your treasurer, anyone that you want to invite to be a part of your QuickBooks universe. So it's cloud-based, there's no need to worry about servers or computer access. Of course, at the very highest level, we have seen QuickBooks servers go down before, but in general, that's going to be very, very rare. Intuit's a large organization, and they take a lot of that into account for you. And you can use any web browser to access this. Some definitely work better than others. I'm a big fan of Chrome, but you can use a number of different browsers. QuickBooks Desktop. Again, so you've got generally you've got a 3-user multi-license package, and we'll talk about where to purchase that a little later on in another slide. But generally, for this to be effective, you need to be in the same office. Again, there is the possibility of a server setup, but most of the time we see this as people working in the same office, and you don't, in this setup, you will need someone, whether it's a contracted service or someone in-house, that you can call and troubleshoot issues because they will more than likely arise. Okay, so let's talk about taking the pressure off in-house or contracted IT managers and services. So especially because I would be interested to see, at least I know that many of the organizations I've worked in have used donated computers, donated servers. So the average lifetime, especially if we're talking about like depreciation for this kind of equipment, is maybe 2 years at the most. So you've got a lifespan of equipment, and if you're starting with it being 2 years old, which for many of us sounds great, but it's already on, unfortunately, the ancient side. So Eileen's laughing at me, but it's true. So one thing you'll want to consider is QuickBooks Online allows you to take the pressure off your computer's age itself. I mean, obviously at some point access altogether becomes challenging, but a computer that's 2 years old should still be able to function within the realm of, as long as you have good internet, you should be able to access QuickBooks relatively easily. And if you are in that situation where you're using a lot of donated products, it also means that you probably don't have the same configuration for each. That means you'll spend a lot more time working with an IT manager, and that can be costly and time consuming. So if you're moving that direction, the good thing about online is it's always available. It allows you to see it whenever you need to. You don't have to go into the office to do any of it. And you also don't have to worry about things like backups and storing them on extra servers, and because the information will constantly be available again online. Okay, so sync abilities with third-party payroll providers. And we'll talk about this a little bit later with the AP processes that we've kind of laid out for you. But one thing I will say from personal experience, and I'm not going to write this down, but one thing that I think both Eileen and I have discovered when it comes to syncing products is that syncing products, whether we're talking about these kind of payroll apps or we're talking about Bill.com, like we'll talk about a little later, we have seen those be much more successful with cloud-based applications like QuickBooks Online. So we have used Bill.com, we'll talk about, we've used it in desktop, we've used it in online, and we've seen the success with online syncing be much greater. So in terms of having all your things sync across the board, eliminating the need to enter things, I will say that cloud-based to cloud-based tends to be a much better system. So if that describes you or where you'd like to go, the cloud-based application of QuickBooks Online will support you a little better in that. So most of the, just to kind of say this out loud, most of the major and even some of the smaller third-party payroll organizations like ADP, Paychecks, we'll talk about Gusto as well. I know we've had several organizations that use Gusto. All of those, at least those three that I just mentioned, do have syncing apps available that work with QuickBooks Online. So for QuickBooks Online, I do want to mention some things and proclivities that this is really one of the only major downsides we've seen to QuickBooks Online so far. And we continue to put in little, please update this comments to QuickBooks, but it hasn't happened yet. For many of you, you are probably using some form of class per employee when you're running payroll. And in desktop, what you're able to do is separate those out into different areas of the organization, which are major functional expense or areas. So you've got program expense, fundraising, and management in general. A lot of times, especially with the salaried employees, you'll probably have those pre-allocated. So the downside here is to QuickBooks Online, it does only allow one class per employee. So every time you run payroll, you will have to then do a journal entry to break those areas out. I know some organizations, depending on how much they like to see, have done that one journal entry once a year. But for a lot of organizations, they like to see where they are in the process, especially budget to actual. So this tends to be in every payroll process. So that is something to consider. But again, we will also talk about some ways to potentially get around this with third-party syncing apps. Okay, just in case you don't know, but I'm going to assume that many people here are probably already using QuickBooks, but the language that QuickBooks uses for these kind of different areas, so you'll have your GL codes, let's say salaries and wages, and now you can break that across the columns of program, fundraising, management in general, and those are the class areas. Just in case that was unfamiliar to you, but again, we've got many people here who are already QuickBooks aficionados. So let's talk about desktop. This is one area, and I know for us in particular, this is the one stumbling block that we have been continually working to get around, get over, and that is desktop does allow multiple classes per employee, so it does eliminate this need for an additional journal entry. And again, today's discussion centers around the fact that you all are looking to go virtual, and there are going to be pluses and minuses to every which way you can go. For instance, we've talked about a couple of the downsides to desktop today. So this is one that you'll just have to work through until QuickBooks updates itself. And it's just something for you to know. I think it's not necessarily that it will, if you have an experienced bookkeeper that you're working with, they should be able to do this for you. And if you don't, then we can help you put together your journal entry, or at least a template.
Evan, we have a question about what you're referring to when you say journal entry, so maybe you can clarify that before you go further so that everyone's on the same page.
Okay, so a general journal entry, I don't know where to begin. So a general journal entry is the accounting behind everything that QuickBooks does. So when you think about accounting, you've got like all these little T accounts and you've got debits and credits. And the goal is in any journal entry, those two have to equal. I think it may be a little beyond the scope of this discussion to dive too deep. If you're not familiar with what the journal entries are, that's probably okay. In general, we would suggest that you have your accounting professional or someone that you work with closely who is comfortable with journal entries do them for you, because we've seen a number of occasions where people are trying to get there and with the best intentions, but if you're not comfortable with the journal entries, QuickBooks makes it so that you don't generally have to. And if you wanted to leave this to the end of the year and that's the place that you were the most comfortable with, and then you gave it to your CPA or like 501 Commons for them to do the allocations, you could. And I would say if we're talking about a situation where it's do the journal entry and do it now or wait and have someone else do it later that is comfortable with them, I would say wait. Eileen, do you have another point of view on that?
Well, it just depends on how they want to see their monthly financials. If they need them broken out into their functional expenses, they're going to want to do it monthly at
least monthly. But again, I would say definitely have your accounting professional do that if you're not comfortable.
Yeah, the bookkeeper should be doing it or whomever.
Yeah, Jenny, does that kind of answer the question?
I hope so. And the person who asked it also said they will look into a little bit more afterwards, but I just wanted to see if you could get a little bit indication, so maybe it's easier to follow along. So
I'd like to make a comment at what Evan was saying, that everything you do in your QuickBooks or your financial package has two sides to it. Like he said, there's a debit and a credit. Accounts have a normal balance, and that's where people can get into trouble if they don't know how to do a journal entry, because every side has a debit, every side has a credit. But if you're giving a credit to an account that normally has a debit balance, then you're doing it in the opposite way, and you can go kiddlywomp really fast. Right. But when you're writing a check or creating an invoice inside QuickBooks, you're creating both sides to that journal entry.
And QuickBooks is doing the journal entry for you. So, for instance, what Eileen just said exactly. So you've got like cash coming out, you're crediting the cash account, but QuickBooks is doing that all for you. So journal entries are only times that you specifically, like we're talking about in payroll, where it's something that QuickBooks Online hasn't thought of yet, even though the desktop product has. And so therefore you need to manually do that. But again, if you're not comfortable with that, or like Eileen said, you're not comfortable with the natural balances of the accounts or how they need to equal, it's really best to leave it with what's in QuickBooks, and then, either monthly or annually work with your accounting professional to make those adjustments. Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. And I appreciate the question, so keep them coming. So let's talk about third-party payroll syncing apps. So we do payroll for people. So, we have a varying degree of experiences with different payroll products. And in most cases, I think, and Eileen, you can probably correct me if I'm off here. In a lot of cases, we get the reports and then make the journal entry manually. But these products do exist to do some of the syncing for you. I personally have worked with Paychecks. And Paychecks does have, at least in the desktop product, has a download and upload. And you worked with a payroll specialist to help you match accounts so that when things would import, they would go to where they're supposed to be. Again, avoiding doing that journal entry because things are mapped for you. So the major national ones, and then one that's a little newer, all have these kind of payroll syncing apps that you can investigate. So you've got Run, powered by ADP, Paycheck, Link, and Sync, and Gusto. So one thing for us at 501 Commons in particular, when we talk about payroll, we are Washington State, Pacific Northwest, but really Washington State based. So when we have organizations, and we do have a couple that have employees across the nation, we generally suggest these third parties. And the reason being that once you get out of one state and the state that you're comfortable with, at that point you suddenly have a whole new slew of different state agencies to get to know, filing requirements, timetables. So ultimately, we think that these organizations, all they do is payroll all day long. They have the infrastructure. At that point, it's definitely worth your time and money to go that direction.
On that previous slide, I would like to make a comment. The Gusto is the only one where I've seen this, a client that I do payroll for or accounting for. They usually work best only if there's a standard allocation. If you have to have a different allocation every pay period because people turn in timesheets recording their time in this program or that program, and it changes every payroll, then I'm not finding they're as responsive to that need within the organization. So if you're using a standard allocation, they have the ability to put employee A's wages into a particular class and then employee B in another one, or to break it up between 2 or 3. But it's usually standard allocations and not ad hoc allocations.
I think that's good insight. My experience was slightly different with Paychecks, but again, that wasn't QuickBooks Online. With Paychecks, they were pretty good. The only issue, and I did desktop, was if the name wasn't exactly right, but again, it wasn't a sync, it was an upload. So if anything ever got cattywampus in there, I don't know if I think that's a real word.
Yeah, it is.
It's a real word. If anything ever got cattywampus or was entered slightly differently, and I mean even a space, then it wouldn't upload correctly. So I think that with a syncing app, you're probably not going to run into quite that problem. Okay, so improving access for your contracted accounting services. Again, one thing that I like that we'll talk about here, we have our own QuickBooks accountant online. And what I like about this is that you are going to invite your accountant. So what I like to see in organizations, and we're moving more and more to this model, is that organizations own their product. There are a couple of reasons I like this. From our perspective, it means that we're not housing your information. But on top of that, I think it also means that you at every stage of the process have ownership of your own information. And if you ever choose to leave your current accountant, it's as simple as just ending their invite and then moving on to the next person. So it reduces this need at the end of an engagement or at any point really, but this need to have this back and forth file sharing, and it makes the process a lot cleaner, and you constantly are in control of your information, which I think is always a good thing. Okay, it can allow for you to have simultaneous people working in it, which is also possible in desktop, but not to the same degree in terms of distance and how far apart you are. So this allows you to be able to simultaneously work with your accountant. The TechSoup version of QBO, so QuickBooks Online Plus, includes up to 5 users like we discussed versus the 3 users in QuickBooks Desktop. And though your accountant can create, so an accountant like we don't, but we could create a file for you. But again, our recommendation is always that you own the product. And on top of that, I think that means that you also then are aware of the cost of doing business, the cost of your accounting software. I've seen, especially we in our desktop, for a lot of clients still house the file for them, but ultimately, then when you go out and realize how expensive it is to keep those products for yourself, it can become quite a shock. I mean, when you're buying your own payroll license, et cetera. So I generally think it's a good idea for you to have command of that knowledge from the very beginning. I think that you should know how much your payroll license costs, know how much your accounting software licenses cost. And that way you can be on top of that. Okay, so then you're now considering I'm almost to the jumping off point. Let's talk about how I get from the cliff to the water. So I don't know if that's a really great analogy, but that's what we're going to use for today. So if you are converting from desktop to online, the entire process is relatively simple. Just remember that the products are not exactly the same. So one thing I like to say when people are transitioning is you have to kind of approach it afresh. I think one of the most challenging things is if you're like, well, it was like this in desktop, where is it here? Most of the time, I think it's just best to see that they have pluses and minuses. They are completely different products that happen to be designed by the same company. And I think they probably should have just named it something else, because it's a different focus, different interface. And Eileen, I don't know if you feel similarly. When I look at the two, there's definitely not a one-to-one comparison. Okay, well, so it's important to remember they're separate, and that you just need to approach this like learning a new language. Just start from the beginning. Okay, so if you're going to transfer, think about the timing of the switch. So one thing that you need to know is that you should consider switching at the tax year, the beginning of the tax year. And that way you can keep all of your payroll records in one accounting system through the end of the tax year and then make the switch. The reason being, and I think it's a security feature, when you switch to online, and there are reasons to do it at a different point in time. We've certainly had organizations do it, but when you switch, everything will transfer, but with payroll, all of the gross numbers, all the things that end up in your P&L and your balance sheet will transfer. The individual employee information will not. So your individual paychecks, your SSNs, all that information that you carefully entered will not. And that will be true no matter when you switch. It just tends to be less of a barrier when you start at the beginning of the tax year, because you don't have to worry about the prior information per employee, so that you can get W-2s or 1099s out. And the reason, and so if you're going to switch mid-year, which again, if you're like, well, my fiscal year starts July 1, I want to switch. We've had organizations do that. Just know that you will have a lot of time spent entering all that back information back in, so that you can have a complete set of information, so that when you issue your W-2s, you don't have this, getting information out of two systems. You want to have it all in one place. So Eileen, I know you've done that a number of times. Anything that you would say to add to that? Oh, you're muted.
There's lawn mowing going on outside, so I had myself muted because I have the window open, because otherwise it's stuffy. Yeah, well, just like Evan said, you have to, everything from January 1 through whenever you do this has to be entered in manually into QBO. It doesn't transfer over, and it is very time consuming. So you just got to be willing to pay whomever you do your bookkeeping the time to enter it all in.
Right.
I've done it. It's a pain, but it can be done.
Yeah. And again, it's if it's the best choice for you to start at the beginning of your fiscal year, we've certainly had organizations do it. This is just more for your knowledge. And if you can time it to coincide with the tax year, it will be easier on you, because you won't have to enter back paychecks. All the employee specific information will still need to be entered, but you won't have to go back and enter it paycheck by paycheck. You'll be able to start afresh from January 1, which would be the goal there. Cool. Okay. So the transfer process, we've done this a number of times. So I wanted to just give you kind of an overview. So overall, the process is pretty easy to upload your desktop information into your QBO. And all of the desktop products, especially, will either force an upgrade if it's 2017 or earlier, or they will have an option to convert your file to QBO. Before you transition, some things to think about. Ensure that your records are complete and up to date. So make sure, like if you're doing it at year end, for instance, make sure all of that stuff is done and then transition. Don't like do it and then like move and be like, oh, well, we still got to do this. Do it all in one system. And even that does often mean that you have a little bit of a time gap where you may have a couple days that are behind or whatever in terms of entering your next thing, because you'll want to make a pretty clean break. So finish everything for 1 year and then start entering everything in the next time period. So, if you get things that cross that line, just make a careful decision, finish everything for 1 year, then start the new. So make sure you're not transitioning at a critical time for things like your financial records or tax. So not in the middle of your like, oh, I've got to get month end close, but I'll transition first. Don't do that. Or year end close especially. Again, all those things should be done first. Make sure you've backed up your company file. Again, QuickBooks will force a backup in the process. but it never hurts to have an extra backup, make sure that you feel comfortable with the information. And it doesn't impact you being able to use your QuickBooks Desktop. So this process doesn't hurt the desktop file, but it is kind of a breaking point. You want to be able to move directly into QBO and not compete with systems. So you don't want to try and half, because Eileen's actually had that experience where we've had an organization that transitioned, but not entirely. We thought they entirely, but then we found all these things later that had to be like back entered into the online file. And I think that was quite time consuming and quite costly, right, Eileen?
Yeah, it was a pain.
So don't do that to yourself. It'll cost you a lot more money than it's worth. Okay, make sure you purchase the QBO license and you can log in. With QBO, I will make a quick recommendation that you use an email that is not like the executive director's email. You need to use an email that is not tied directly to a singular person. I have seen a number of transitions go awry because people couldn't get into the admin login. The admin login should be something, a separate email that only gets used for this, that can be shared so that, I mean, obviously you can give your executive director admin privileges, but there should be one control account that isn't tied to a person, because I've seen people leave and then they don't share their login information because they were using a personal account. Lots of pain there, different conversation, but make sure that you know that login and that it's not necessarily tied to a person in case someone leaves or gets locked out. You should have another way to get in. So often organizations create a finance or a QuickBooks just for that purpose. Okay. QuickBooks has a whole comprehensive list and a beautiful video of how to do all of this at that link. So you'll get this presentation when we're done. Again, if you're using a version older than 2017, you'll have to upgrade the software first. And another thing is if you're using a server, you will, like we had, you'll need to get a trial version. So again, if you fit into the older than 2017 or using a server, I would contact QuickBooks support to have them help you walk through it, because they will need to give you a trial version of the software to be able to do this. Sound good? Okay, where to purchase? We always use TechSoup.org. So hopefully you have worked with them before and already have your TechSoup login set up. It's, by the way, if you need to set up, it's a couple-day process. So, and sometimes over a week. So just make sure that you have plenty of time built in. The QuickBooks Online Plus subscription is it's QuickBooks Online Plus, 1 year, 5 users, $75 per year. And again, this is versus $70 per month if you purchase directly through QuickBooks. So you really want to go with TechSoup.org, especially as a nonprofit that qualifies. And the other thing to know is if you already have QuickBooks Online, you can't transfer one to the other. So it's a pretty tedious process to transition. So we've had organizations that had gone to the open marketplace and they just ended up staying, even though it was 60, 75, 85, whatever a month, because you will basically have to transition the QuickBooks Online file to desktop and then re-upload it. So the possibilities of data corruption are pretty large. So again, if you fall into that category, it's probably not going to be beneficial to try and do the process. You can, and it is definitely cost saving. You just kind of have to like cost benefit analysis. It's just a possibility that a lot of things could get lost or messed up. Okay, TechSoup's requirements in case you don't know. You can have, may request as many services as you need. Some of them have a limit in terms of how many you can request in a year. QuickBooks is one. Your organizational operating budget of any size, nonprofits and libraries only. So you need to have a 501c3 designation or be a public library. Oh, sorry, public libraries are not eligible for Office 365. And other library services may qualify. You can see a list there. I'm not going to go too far. I don't think we've had any library services, so I tend to only look at 501c3s. Questions? I haven't seen any pop up, but Jenny, do you have any?
No, none yet. Usually when you ask for questions, though, sometimes some comes in, but nothing yet, no.
Well, to keep things moving, so everybody out there in TV land, if you have questions, keep asking. Jenny can feel free. She's empowered to interrupt me, and she is well aware of this. So she can, oh, I see a question.
Yes, how do nonprofits get Office 365 via TechSoup?
You can, yes. So you can order 360, but again, that's not really my bailiwick. Our tech team would be the best place to go to for that. So you can contact them directly, but you can certainly look through TechSoup's long library and I'm using a library in a different sense here, so not talking about public libraries, et cetera, but they do have a large number of donated products that I would highly encourage you to look at. And I don't know specifically with Office 365, that's not been something I've had to purchase. So you'll want to look at requirements. Sometimes there's a user cap. For instance, QuickBooks Online Plus is 5 users. So that's a little outside my bailiwick, but I would encourage you to go to TechSoup.org and just look through.
Yes, definitely. If someone hasn't been there, it's a good thing to think of when you need software.
Yeah, I think it's always the first place to start. Anytime you need some kind of new software, see if it's on TechSoup first, and then go look at the open marketplace. Cool?
Yeah, that's the only question this far.
Okay, cool. There we go. So let's talk and transition to accounts payable. So again, like I said in the very beginning, accounts payable is the place where people tend to struggle the most getting rid of paper checks and paper processes. So we'll talk about a couple of options that we like, a couple of options that are a little more stopgap, but we'll go through a couple of different ways that you can move your accounts payable virtually. We're not going to talk about accounts receivable, again, because my experience is that a lot of people have already been pretty savvy at getting this done. A lot of people have used some kind of web processor, PayPal, Stripe, to take donations and other product service offerings through their website or credit cards. So most people, I think so far, have been able to limit the number of paper checks they get, but cutting paper checks tends to be the place where I see a lot of issues. So the first product we're going to talk about is Bill.com. So Bill.com allows you to pay vendors both electronically with ACH payments and via paper check, printed and mailed by Bill.com. So it takes the whole pressure off of you having check stock in your office, especially if you're not going to your office anytime soon, off of you. So we really like Bill.com. This system allows multiple levels of access and visibility, which makes the control process significantly more stable. Again, we'll talk about some options later on at the very end of the presentation that have some real major control issues. What we like about this is that you can have an approver. The approver can't edit or change anything on the accountant side, and the accountant, for instance, can't approve payments. So it helps build in that checks and balance. It integrates with QuickBooks Online and Desktop, but again, we have seen it work best with online. And it keeps your records of the files that you send to Bill.com within the system. So, again, it means that you can take the pressure off of yourself for having a digital record of each and every one of the invoices that you receive or bills, and it can store it all in one place. And you can, if you ever chose to leave Bill.com, you get it as a DVD or a series of DVDs at the end. So you could still continue to have that digital record of the information. The other thing we really like is you can delegate access to an auditor. So a view-only access. So the auditor can see everything from when things were approved, what they were for, how they were coded, who approved it, and when. And again, it's one of the most comprehensive systems we've seen. It is a significant investment of time, energy, and money compared to other systems. So this is not a stopgap measure. I will say that. I think that this is something that if you are interested in going whole hog and getting rid of paper checks and continuing the system of being able to work virtually forever, this is a good option for you. And with our work, we have found a lot of benefits to it, because that way we don't have to have days that go in between getting the invoice, cutting the check, sending it back to a signer. So, keeping those balances with USPS, with the mail, can be quite labor intensive and time intensive. So this is much faster, but it is not something that you'll want to just start and stop and be done. There is a free trial option, so you can play around with it, but moving into it is something that you need to invest in. It's a monthly subscription service. It does have integrations with accounting software, and you will need to have a team level or greater. We'll show you those here in a moment. In addition to the monthly subscription, there are per transactions fees, which again, we'll go over in a future slide. And ACH payments are significantly less expensive, so you'll want to consider moving your vendors to ACH, and we'll talk about how they do that. And then I've included the website, but we'll go over some of the high level things from the website in the next slides. So here is the range of options, starting with $39 per user per month, which sounds great, but it doesn't integrate with anything. So the option that you need to be at is this team option. I don't know if you can see my clicker or not, but it's the $49 per user per month. And you'll need to consider having at least 2 users. So you'll have an approver and someone who's doing your bookkeeping. So you need to have at least those 2. So again, this isn't the cheapest option we have found, but it is the most comprehensive. So in terms of the time cost that you'll be saving, it's quite extensive. I know that we've found that to be true, is that it speeds up the reaction time. And especially if you're in-house and your people are in-house, it can make it quite quick. The transaction cost. So actually with ACH, it's again 49 cents per transaction. So the cost of a stamp. And actually I thought it had gone up, so I was really quite relieved to see that that hadn't changed. The paper checks, it's $1.69 per check to have that sent. So it is significantly more expensive. We do know organizations that use that. It's up to you. You can for free send an invite to your vendors, which we'll show here in a moment. And they can start a free Bill.com account. So we've had a few rare exceptions where people just do not want an EFT, and we get it, but it helps your organization, and it's the same cost as sending it in the mail ordinarily. So without having to pay for check stock. So I think it has a lot of benefits. So this, just to give you a quick overview of what the software looks like. This is one of our clients that's on Bill.com. And this is their dashboard. This is kind of the overview. You know, if you had bills to pay, you'd see it where that little blue star is, and it kind of gives you the payments out over in the right-hand corner, bill approvals, things that need your attention. You, as part of Bill.com, will get an inbox. So you'll create it, and that's where you'll have every vendor send invoices, or you can send them. Sometimes you'll get them in the mail. You'll want to scan them or take a picture of them, send them to the inbox, and that's what starts the process. And then, just like you see here, this is after the fact, but your accountant over on the right-hand corner, you can see they can code and assign an approver to the process. So it syncs with your QuickBooks. So every time you add an account or a class in QuickBooks, it'll get added here. We tend to use the Bill.com module to do all of this, and then it syncs back to QuickBooks. You can do it the opposite direction. We just prefer this option so that way you keep everything within the system, especially when it comes to like the documentation, because this is, as you can see, after the fact. So it's retaining a copy of the invoice that you coded and approved and got paid. So you, in perpetuity, will be able to look back and say, okay, what was that for? Why did I pay them? What did it look like? And again, your auditor would be able to see that as well. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oftentimes when an invoice like this one goes into your inbox, if there are any additional pages, you can save those additional pages with this invoice. Say,
right.
Say there's an email that has additional instruction. So all of that gets saved into one little package for this particular vendor, which can be very beneficial. And like Evan said in the beginning, auditors, when they go in, are able to see all of this information. It's a very good audit tool.
For sure. And so moving on to the next thing, setting up your vendors. Again, your vendors come from QuickBooks, so that sync process brings them all over. And then like you see here, you can set up e-payments, so you can invite them. And then they set up their own free account. They can even send you invoices through Bill.com if they really wanted to. And you know, they enter all their information. So it takes the pressure off you to get things like bank account and routing information. They enter that all themselves, so you don't have to be a part of that. And then your approver, if I, had gotten, this is my personal approval screen. So if I had gotten a bill assigned to me, I would be able to go here and approve it. You'll get an email notification, and there's an app. So you can even approve these on the app. Paying the bill, again, once it's approved, it comes back to your bookkeeper or accountant so they can actually pay the bill. They can actually pay it, schedule it, and there's a little bit of a grace period. I think it's 2 days maybe between when you set the pay to when it actually goes out. So you have a number of different stopgap measures within there to keep you knowing the controls are there, knowing that you press the right button, knowing that things are correct. So We really like the system. And then you can see payments out. You can still void payments after the fact. There is a fee for that, but you know, hopefully it's rare that you need to void checks. So you can see kind of a big long list and a record, and that way you can compare to what's in QuickBooks. Okay, so that ends my bill.com section, and I know we're running close. I've only got a couple more things to cover. So again, if you do need to drop off the call, we understand. You will get a copy of this in video form along with the slides after we're done. So in case there's any reason that you can't stay on, don't worry. Jenny, do we have any questions about bill.com?
Yes, we do have one question about it. Is it compatible with QuickBooks Desktop?
Yes. Again, the issue that we've found with QuickBooks Desktop, we use a server to host our QuickBooks files, and that has made it a little more difficult. We have not had great success. I know Eileen's got a client on desktop with bill.com, and we haven't really had success in the long run getting the syncing app to work. It does work, and I think if you were outside of our environment with the with that, the other thing is every computer has to have the syncing app on it. So again, cloud-based to cloud-based, it tends to work best in this environment where you're using the cloud-based bill.com, the cloud-based QuickBooks, and we've seen that it syncs automatically every 24 hours, and it'll tell you what sync errors there are. So you can go in and fix any issues. And a lot of times that could be like coding, things are mismatched. It's a good question. It definitely has it. I haven't seen it be as successful.
So careful if your QuickBooks Desktop is on a server specifically.
Especially on the server. I mean, and if you're a single user using QuickBooks on a single computer, then it will probably function better. I don't think it will be as easy. You do have to manually sync it. That is another difference. Whereas the QBO and bill.com automatically syncs every 24 hours. You can manually sync it as well, but the desktop version, you have to manually sync every time. Cool. Questions?
No more questions yet.
Cool. So we're gonna move on to another one that we have found and only recently really started working with, but so, you know, to let you know, full disclosure, we experimented with bill.com and we love the system, but we found it, like you can probably imagine, a little expensive for the clients that probably needed it the most. It was going to cost too much for them on a regular basis, and they just don't have the volume of transactions to need that level of system. It really works well for organizations that have a decent volume of transactions and that are that have a good setup of controls and the cost is not the concern for them. Deluxe eChecks is another option that we like that has a much lower commitment. So you can try this option out and just see how it goes with a pretty low threshold of concern or money lost. So they are in their normal form, we'll talk about something that's come up actually just this week. In their normal form, it is a check. It gets sent to people via email that they can either print and then use like a check at the bank, or they can print and then they can, what is that called? Auto deposit with your picture.
Scan.
There's a word though, like that auto capture I'm eloquent, I swear. But they can do that automatic deposit on their phone as well. You would have to do the printed version, but the only downside that we've seen to Deluxe eChecks or eChecks in general is that they come to people's email. It's a little weird. Some people think it's spam. So, you know, we'll talk about that in a moment. They're a good low risk solution for small nonprofits. They actually can be a stopgap measure. Like you can get them set up relatively easily. They preserve good checks and balances between the bookkeeper and the account signer. And they allow the primary account holder to set permissions and users to ensure better controls, which we like. They have a free add-on for QuickBooks, and here specifically QuickBooks Online, and to help you with your normal accounts payable, so you can do all of it. Unlike bill.com, the recommended way here is to do it in QuickBooks first, and you'll see it all show up in their module, which I'll show you an example of. Deluxe eChecks are affordable. 50 checks for $30 is what it starts at. The beauty of it is you get all of these things within that $30. So all of the things we're talking about, the QuickBooks syncing, the setup, the controls, all of that comes I mean, you can set that part up for free, but all of that comes with any level of checks that you purchase. And then they're just like checks. They don't expire. It's, 50 checks. Whenever you get done with those 50 checks, you order more. So we found that to be a pretty good deal, good option for people who can't really make Bill.com and the cost associated with work there. So you'll see a link for more information on pricing. There's no monthly subscription, which we like. And new, this literally came out the other day and I haven't had a chance to actually get to use it, but I got an update from them. They are now allowing direct deposit to your vendors or PayPal account. So it actually kind of allows you to do something similar to Bill.com. Again, you'll want to talk to your vendors about this because if you were going to move to this system, you would have to make sure that you communicated to all of your vendors that they're going to be getting things via email. So you probably wouldn't want to move just from one day to the next. You probably want to have like an email to get out to your clients or customers or vendors. Okay, there is a link to the website. When you get the file, feel free to go click happy. Just to give you kind of an idea of what it looks like, you've got the QuickBooks add-on. This is the dashboard. You can see everything there. This is kind of your home base. And it's pretty simple, easy to use. And then this is just an example. You can set permissions of other people that are on your account, what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, whether or not they can sign. This is just an image of what the check looks like when it shows up in your email, and then you log in, create an account to retrieve. And here's what it looks like in your account. You print it from here. In this case, obviously, you can see that mine is printed. And then you either will auto capture that at home, or you can take it to the bank. So a little clunky, but comparatively easy to use, low risk, and it can be used now. You can experiment with it for the $30, and if you don't like it, you never have to use it again. Okay, so let's move on. Any questions, Jenny, on Deluxe eChecks?
Nothing yet.
Okay. Credit cards. So credit cards are an excellent option for organizations. In my scoping calls, we'll talk about the difference between debit cards here. I always recommend that people move to a credit card if they've been using debit cards. And that partially comes from personal experience. I had a treasurer of a board once who ran with scissors and was buying things out of our checking account and wasn't checking to see if there was any money, and it was very scary. So what I like about credit cards is they do have better fraud protections. You have a longer period of time to see and check and review if things have been done fraudulently, and it allows you to automate payments, especially things like cable, all those things that you can just automatically add to these every month. It's a very good option for these kind of regular things. The other thing is I like that you can set limits and you can assign employees cards and know that they can't go over a certain limit. So it helps you manage, for instance, what you don't want to have happen is you have a reimbursement policy. Let's say they go out, they purchase something that's way over the amount that you would allow, and they, for instance, purchase things that you wouldn't allow to begin with because they're not allowed under your purchase policy. So in this case, they've gone over and you're not going to reimburse them the full amount, they're out the money. Whereas if you have a limit on their card, even if they purchase things that are not allowed, which they would have to repay, there's only so much damage they could do, or especially if someone stole the card, there's only so much damage that they could do. And credit cards tend to be a little easier to get transactions taken off for fraud. In my experience, debit cards, again, with debit cards, cash is cash, and when it's out of your account, it's gone. And the bank will often work with you, but it may take several days. So if it's a really large amount of money, then it's something to really consider. Limits, again, minimize the potential damage of fraudulent spending. And in a lot of my experience, I've worked with banks that offer a credit card through the bank. What I like about this is that you have in one portal your credit card account as well as your banking information. You can make transfers to the credit card, which can, again, eliminate a need for doing a lot of cut a check and back and forth. So I like that you can see it all in one place, and it can make that process a little easier. Direct deposit vendor payments through QuickBooks. So this is specifically designed for 1099 vendors. So if you're going to use this method, just to say it outright, this is really going to need to be used in conjunction with something else like the ACH, which we'll talk about in a minute, or it can be used with like the credit cards that we've already talked about. So you wouldn't be able to go completely virtual with just this option. Okay, so this is through QuickBooks. You can pay through direct deposit your QuickBooks vendors, but again, they need to be 1099 vendors. That's the way QuickBooks kind of separates this out. So you'll need your own payroll subscription to make this work, and there are fees, and I've looked into this. The fees, every subscription is different. Apparently, payroll subscriptions with QuickBooks are kind of like a quilt. Kind of depends on when you started, how many you've got. There's no solid answer. There's no singular answer for how much it's going to cost per transaction. It depends on which account which subscription you have and what level you're at, and what day you bought. So just FYI, you'll want to search and call into it to get that information. Online and desktop payroll licenses have multiple levels. You definitely want to talk to them. And then I've given you a whole, QuickBooks does have a great page on this information. So if you're interested in this, go to the link, and it goes point by point. So it's not incredibly hard to use, but it is something that it can be really effective for your organization, but it's not going to be the sole way that you're going to be able to move virtually with your accounts payable. Okay, ACH. And we've only got one more method after this to talk about. So an ACH, automatic clearinghouse, I'm sure many of you have used them, and they've gotten better since the last time I used them in an organization, but we'll talk about them. It coordinates automatic payments without using paper checks, wire transfers, credit cards, or cash. They can be set up for receiving as well as paying money. Of course, right here, we're talking about payments. And it can be a very effective way for organizations to improve efficiency for making and receiving payments, and while eliminating paper. Your bank is the best place to go for this. And they've gotten better, they've gotten cleaner. I was looking at Chase the other day because I personally have a Chase account, and their business ACH options look relatively clean and easy to set up. When I set them up with my local bank for an organization I ran a couple years ago, it was a much more long and drawn out process. It allows you, again, to set access and permission levels for different employees based on what they do and how they interact with the AP process. Pros and cons. So you've got, on the pro side, it'll make fund transfers easier and more secure. It facilitates regular memorized payments. Again, I would say it actually works best, like in my experience, which again, things change, but I would say in my experience, it works best with transactions that are the same every month. So, I worked at a dance school, for instance, and we use this on the opposite side. We use this for receivables. So we would do a sweep on a monthly basis, but it worked mostly well because we had the same recurring transaction amounts every month, and we had a minimal need to change it. But if you're doing a large number of these that change every time, at least in my experience, it can be very time consuming. It has lower fees than credit card payments, and recurring payments can reduce entry error. Again, if they're truly recurring. For any errors, reversals can be really challenging and labor intensive and time intensive. So if you make a mistake, basically once you push the button, you have a window of time. Sometimes it's 24 hours. Sometimes depending on when you push the button, you may have no time, and then it's gone. And then you have to work with the bank to do a reversal, and that could take a week to get done. So especially on the receivable side, that can be really scary. But also when you're paying somebody and then you have to, basically once it's in the person's account, the intended person's account, it's there. So you basically are having the bank ask the other bank if they can have the money back. So there's no guarantee that once it's there, you're gonna get it back. Most of the time you should, but just FYI, again, once it's gone, it's gone. So it will require generally some additional training and potentially additional systems. And it allows companies to have your bank account and routing number. I mean, granted, they could get that from your check, but it's direct access to your bank account. So think about that. We've come to the end of our presentation. I know it's been a whirlwind of information, so I am glad you guys are bearing with me through all of this. This is my least favorite option, and we'll talk about some things to consider and why I don't love online bill pay. So most banks do allow some form of bill pay. And from everything I've seen, business bill pay is set up just like it is for personal bill pay, which is, you set the amount that you're going to send, you click a button, and the bank sends a check. The system is convenient, but one thing is it has a huge lack of controls and segregation of duties. So one person is normally doing everything from entry to pressing the button to making sure it gets there. So, again, this is from your bank account. It's not a credit card. So your fraud protection is pretty low because they're assuming that whoever has access to your bank account, who got through all the hoops of getting into your bank account, is the right person to be doing this. But if you've got like a bookkeeper and an executive director and someone else that all have access to your bank account, which, by the way, we do not recommend, then, it's a really open fraud risk. And we don't like that. So you should check with your individual bank. Some of them may have a more sophisticated option, but most of them that I've seen do not. Generally, this method comes with the most risk, again, because you're just entering the information. And again, for our clients, we won't do this. We won't do the online bill pay for our clients. It is an option that we offer, especially in these kind of stopgap measure where you just need to get things paid. But in that situation, we would be hands off. We would tell you what needs to be paid and you would have to enter it. And again, because it puts us at a certain amount of risk that for going into your bank account, which we stay out of. If we ever have banking access, it's view only, so we can't create, generate, or manage transactions. So I would also recommend that as a general rule. You really want those fraud protections of being able to have a checks and balance. And also, even without fraud, people make mistakes. The whole point of the checks and balances, what if someone cuts a check for $500 versus $50 or $5,000 versus $500? And the whole point of the approval is that looks weird. So you need those systems. Anyway, so that leads us to the end of our presentation, 6 minutes over. So I know you probably have places to go, but I would be interested in hearing any questions you have about the presentation today. Jenny, do we have anything that's come in?
No, there are no questions.
Okay, well, with that, I will then move on to my final slide of the day. And again, if we didn't cover something here for you, reach out to 501 Commons. We can do a quick consult. Quick consults are $25 per quarter hour. The fabulous Eileen does a number of them for us. So things like, I need help creating my template journal entry for QBO, or any of these things that we can offer advice and information on. So if it doesn't go deep enough, again, these are the ones that we work with. So systems outside of that would require research, and we don't necessarily say that we have any experience with them, but we're happy to dig further, help you, especially when it comes to questions about QuickBooks. We use QuickBooks all the time. Here's the email, financeconsults@501commons.org. And I think I saw a little blip of a question before we close out. Is that true, Jenny?
Yes, but the question was whether we will be sharing the presentation afterwards, and
Yes.
We will be doing that.
Yes, so you will get a copy of the presentation as well as the slides. So you'll be able to use all of the links and just go click happy. So I really appreciate your time today. I hope we've shared some things that have been helpful for you as you consider moving into the world of the great beyond and the internet. So we're happy to help. Hope that we have, and thank you. So before we leave, Jenny, any last questions?
No more questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody out there in internet land. We really appreciated being able to give this to you and hope to see you again soon. Bye.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.